Welcome to Changing Suits. We're your hosts, Bal
and Taj, discussing the latest news, views, and general life for us Western Asians.
Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, changing_suits, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Hi, welcome to Changing Suits. My name's Bal.
And my name's Taj.
Today we'll be talking to Dipti Solanki, who is a London-based grief coach. Now, Dipti's going to give us a bit of an introduction as to why she went down this path of helping people throughout part of their life looking at grief. So, Dipti, could you give us a bit of an understanding as to where you're based and the kind of work you do, please?
Yes, of course. Hello, ladies. Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's a real privilege to be able to be here with you both today. So, as you quite rightly said, my name's Dipti and I am a grief coach. I live in London. Pre-pandemic, my clinic was in London, but one of the boons of it was I had to close the clinic due to the pandemic, and so now I work completely online. And hold in-person events and work with people all over the world. And the main part of my work, I've done lots of different trainings and certifications over the years, and my experience is wide and varied, but the main crux of my work is that I help people to heal their hearts after any type of loss they've experienced. And a big part of my work is the educational piece, because I really feel that grief is still quite a taboo subject. We don't understand it enough. We don't talk about it enough. And there's a lot that we suffer with in silence because there isn't this awareness and the tools and the openness that we need, because every single person is going to experience grief of some sort in their life, some sort of loss. And we end up being given lots of different labels, but actually we don't have the tools to deal with it.
In regards to the clients that you see, do you tend to specialize with more South Asian clients, or do you have all community clients?
No, people are people to me, and hearts are hearts, and everyone's heart gets broken. And I have people from international clients that come from all over the place, different genders, and I'm open to helping everybody.
You mentioned loss. What is loss? Because in my mind, straight away, I think if someone's passed away, that's a loss. But is there more to that?
Yeah, no, great question. So this is a big part of my educational piece, because I think when we first say grief or loss to anybody, the first thing that springs to our minds is someone's died. Okay. And actually, there are so many studies that have been done that show that there are over 73 different life events that we can experience, whereby our bodies will replicate the same emotions, the same feelings as someone experiences when they have a bereavement as well. And I think at the very core of loss is when a very familiar pattern that we have become used to becomes disrupted. So anything that changes in our life is capable of giving rise to grief and loss as well. So I think that is important. So, instances like divorce, separation, a loss of a loss of health, disability, we can, even good things being grief. So, becoming a parent, getting married, because it all involves change. And while it's brilliant that it's happening, there are elements of our life that suddenly change and we're not familiar with, and there's a disruption to a familiar pattern of behavior. And we grieve elements of our old life that we may have lost as well. So many different things can bring on grief and loss. And I think so poignant to say that, especially in the South Asian community, through the pandemic, we know how that part of the community has suffered so much through, and we are experiencing a collective grief. So much has changed for so many people through the pandemic. And so grief can show up in so many different ways. And we need to educate ourselves about this, because oftentimes we find ourselves feeling certain emotions or a certain way about something. We can't put our finger on what it is that we're feeling. But actually, when we, take away everything and look at the root of it, it's normally rooted in change and feelings of grief.
Can you, in that case, because obviously, like you've said, the same as Taj, when you said loss, the first thing I thought was losing a family member or a friend. With your clients, how do you educate them in that case to say, well, actually, you know, being a new mother, for example, because we've been through it. I know what it feels like, your old life versus your new life, but I would never have put two and two together and said, you know what, that is a loss of my old life. So how do
Yeah.
you educate people to say, well, actually, what you're experiencing is a loss, and this is something you need to look into?
Yeah, and I think great question again. I'm very impressed with your
We
question,
do
ladies.
try here.
I love it. No, and you're doing really well. So I think the way that that is reflected is in my style of working now. For many, many years, I visited lots of different counsellors, and I always came out feeling really frustrated because, it takes a lot for anyone to go and seek help for anything emotional. And, counselling has its place and different horses for courses. I get that. But I would come out and I would end up in a different tangent somewhere else. And I didn't even want to think and just talk about that. And person-centered counselling especially puts it back on you and says, well, what do you think? How do you feel about that and all the rest of it? But actually, I think that healing from something is part education, part uncovering, and then part healing. Okay, that all forms a part of the healing. So what I do is I've developed a framework called the Heart Recovery Framework, and that takes you through all of these parts. So the first part of it is an education all about grief. It talks about what grief could be, how it shows up in the body, how your belief systems are a part of it, how grief builds up in the body, the physical symptoms of it, the emotional symptoms of it, the sabotaging behaviors that we run to because we don't know what we're feeling, and the feelings are so overwhelming. So education is woven into my work with my clients, and I take people through a whole program. So they're with me for 3 or 6 months, and we go through a whole process.
When you said that when you were going to counsellors, you were feeling frustrated. Now, one of the things, as we've been doing this podcast and doing more and more research and looking at what the issues are in the service providers that we have at the moment, research does show the fact that because there's not many South Asian counsellors out there, service providers aren't really encompassing what this community needs because there's a bit of a lack of understanding of culture. Do you think that was part of the problem that you were having when you were sort of leaving the counsellors in that
Yeah,
case?
100%. So I think that we need to be working with people who understand our experiences, firstly on a human level. And I think that many counsellors lack that training, first of all, on a human level about grief.
I think you become conditioned to a lot of these things as well, don't you? If you've been a counsellor for a certain amount of time, it's like, oh, I'm going through the process, unfortunately, sometimes, isn't it?
I hope that doesn't happen, because it shouldn't happen, because then we have no place to be working with people, right? If we're becoming desensitized to that. But I think that there are so many nuances within culture. I think Taj knows that I've just taken part in a BBC documentary. I recently lost my dad, and they were looking at how different communities deal with grief and marriage and all the rest of it. So our episode was about grief and how my culture kind of informs that. And I think it was so educational for so many people as well, because I had friends of mine who said, I didn't realize how many similarities, but how many differences there are in different cultures, and how this informs the way that we grieve as well. And so I think it's really important that we have a better understanding. And sometimes I think it does really help to work with someone who understands the nuances, of cultural beliefs, of values, of grieving, of how things work as well, because you're exhausted enough with your grief, you're confused and overwhelmed enough. You don't want to have to go and sit with a counsellor who's going to project their cultural values onto you and say, no, this is wrong or right, but also someone who just gets it. You don't have to explain it to them as well. And it's a completely different experience.
That's one of the things that's highlighted from a lot of people that listen to this podcast as well. It's about building that awareness and then working out there are so many similarities with different cultures.
Yes.
So I'm glad that you hit that point. I'm going to pick up on something that you touched on was, I'm going to go back a bit, to be honest, before we speak about your father.
Sure.
I used to go to school with your sister.
You did.
And she's an amazing person.
She is.
And basically, you guys lost your mother when she was pretty young. And to be honest, I did not have an inkling, because what we saw of her was she was always happy, the go-to person. How were you dealing with that behind the scenes? Because you were an older year as well, and you were one of these big characters, not just because you were very tall, but just
I'm worried about what you're going to say now.
I'm interested in what you're going to say.
But it was, what was going on behind the scenes? Because you both looked so happy when you were going to school, but obviously there was more to the story of what was happening.
Yeah, for sure. So it was very interesting looking back to see how it unfolded. Mum died very suddenly. I was 13, my sister was 9, and the whole family. I think one incredible thing that most South Asian families are brilliant at is coming together and doing the practical stuff, right? They were there, they were around us, they did the food and made sure all our needs were met, physical needs were met. And it was almost a mindset of life carries on. Okay, it's okay, like we're still together, we carry on. My incredible, beautiful dad as well was a big part of that. And I think they did their level best, because we were all young, my brother as well, we were all young, and they did their level best to keep stability for us. So everything carried on as normal. And, people only ever come from a good place, I like to believe. And that good place was, let's keep things normal for people, for the kids, let it all be okay. So we carried on as normal. Obviously, we missed our mum, but everyone overcompensated. They were really kind to us and they were really loving to us, and it was okay, right? And the really interesting thing there is, I was thinking about this before I came on, is that education is needed in so many different areas of our life, but definitely grief. And I think the South Asian community, they are fantastic at doing the practical stuff, at bringing food around, because that you're so depleted with your grief, you can't do that. Anything practical that needs to be done, we have incredible networks that you need this year. I know someone who can do that for you, and everyone comes together. But the one thing we really need to get better at, in my humble opinion, is the emotional side of it. It's like really feeling into our grief.
Why do you think we are backwards in coming forward in expressing our emotions?
Yeah, big question. So again, it's about conditioning. I think that, most South Asian families are heavily religious. And I think that spirituality and religion is used as a shield to protect us from our emotions. And I think that a lot of spiritual bypassing happens as well of course, in the bigger scheme of things, everything happens for a reason. I do believe that we have a soul plan that's written for us, and we're supposed to live, the amount of days we're supposed to live. But actually, what it is that we are spiritual beings in a human body. And so we have to honor that human experience as well. And part of that human experience is feeling pain, is feeling emotion. And we cannot skip that step. When we skip that step, we have terrible things that we experience afterwards.
Anytime that we've sort of, and 100, just as you're saying, I'm like, that's such a good point, because when we've had a period where we are mourning for someone, and this tends to happen along all of the South Asian community, everyone will be there on day one, and it obviously lasts till the funeral, and then after that, that's when it sort of comes to reality as to what's actually happened. But during that period, I found in my experience that it's been quite nice that we've been so busy during that week or 2 weeks that you're so tired of crying with people that you end up being like, actually, we need to now move forward. And that's where I've sort of experienced saying, actually, the South Asian community is really good in that. However, from what you've picked up on, where we don't talk about the emotions, we have spoken about what that person was like, the practically and all that sort of stuff. But the emotions, you're 100% right there. Never thought about that. That's so interesting.
grief is a very individual, unique experience. We can collectively grieve, but you know, the three of us can experience the same loss, but we will feel it very differently. It will mean very different things to us. It will affect our lives very differently. And it's so nuanced. And it's so important that we have the outlet and the safe spaces where people aren't going to say to us, don't cry, their soul will suffer. You know, you've got to move on with life. That's life. You've got to just get on with it. They'll be upset if they see you like this. You know, they wouldn't want you to feel like this. My whole world has just fallen apart. Excuse me while I lay down on the floor and cry. It's okay. I'm allowed. Right? And it's giving ourselves that permission. And, you know, the reason why I am so passionate about this point, especially, is, you know, I learned the very hard way what happens when we don't experience our emotions. You know, I left school. I was the first girl to go to university in my family. I was hell-bent on success. I was like, it doesn't matter what's happened to me. You know, I'm going to rewrite this story. I'm going to be really successful. I left university, got married, walked into a job as a researcher in Parliament. My life was going great. On the outside, everything was really good. But inside, something wasn't right. And as soon as that happened, I had a breakdown. I was completely depressed. I was so anxious. I couldn't get out of a chair for months. And I didn't understand why. I did not understand why this had happened. And this is when I was going to counsellors, and I was just exhausted. I was like, someone tell me what is going on. I don't understand this. And it wasn't until someone tapped me on my shoulder and said, that's grief. Now, when I got that tap on the shoulder, I said, don't be so ridiculous. That was such a long time ago. I'm over it. I'm okay. Look how well I've done. But actually, she said, give it a go. And so I went through this whole process, and it blew my mind. It was during this that I learned what grief actually is, what it can do to us physically and emotionally, you know, the things we need to do to heal our hearts as well.
Dipti, can I just ask a quick question? So, what you're saying, I'm assuming that realization was from the fact that your mum had passed away when you were 13 and you just hadn't dealt with it. And I suppose people thought that it was best that you didn't cry. Is that correct
Yep.
from what I'm understanding?
Yep.
Okay. So literally
in the eyes of many people, if you aren't showing emotion, if you're being strong, you're all good, right? And actually, what does being strong mean? Being strong means, please don't show me how you feel because I can't handle it. Just be strong and pretend you're okay. That's what being strong actually means. But when we do the inner work, when we do the healing work, being strong means having the courage to say to someone, I'm not doing well today. I'm really missing this person. My heart is breaking. Like, can you just sit with me and allow me to feel my feelings in safety so I can move through this in a healthy way and come out of it the other side?
You just said that what you learned when you'd realized that it was grief. What blew your mind at that point?
So many things blew my mind. The fact that you could be holding on to something for so many years, right? And be completely oblivious to the cause of it, completely oblivious. I had no idea. It blew my mind how grief can happen in so many ways because, you know, when we lose a loved one, we're grieving the fact that they're no longer here, but we're also grieving what could have been, what wasn't, what we wish had been more than what it was. You know, everyone's relationships are different. And I was grieving so much. And also the realizations of what grief actually extends to. There's the actual loss, there's all the secondary losses that come from it as well, you know, and that we don't actually ever stop grieving, but we can heal if we allow ourselves to, and we can rebuild our lives as well in different ways. But yeah, my mind was blown in so many ways, so much so that I was like, oh my goodness, I need to do this work. Everyone in the world needs to know about this. Why is it not everyone talking about this?
So what was different? Because your dad, who was a very big part of your life, he was like the mother and father figure.
He was.
It was a couple of years ago that he passed away. How was your experience dealing with grief compared to dealing with your mother's, the grieving process through that?
Yeah, well, the universe has decided it's never going to be straightforward for us. So Dad actually died during COVID, which was 16 months ago. He died of COVID. And I think that brought its own challenges. The family were not able to be together.
So it was the complete opposite in that case, wasn't it, this time round?
Oh, God, yeah.
Complete opposite. The family were not able to be together. We held online prayers, we had massive outpouring of love from the community, but there was still someone on my doorstep 3 times a day delivering meals.
Gotta have the meals.
Can I just ask in that case, because obviously when you had the experience before, there was lots of people, and like we've said, it does help, but it has the negativity as well, because you have to stay strong during that period. You've got a bit of a comparison there. Where do you think the positivity was in one case and not the other, and what was the negativity in both of the cases then?
I missed not being able to be with my siblings, especially because I was so deeply distressed for them and what they were going through. Dad was a very, very big figure in the community, and I think the outpouring of people, and it would have been quite overwhelming in a good way and in a way that I don't know. Who knows? This is all conjecture, but difficult comparison. I think it's difficult to compare. It. I honestly can't say that there are any positives to being in that situation. There really wasn't, because there was so much fear around. There was, it's difficult. I can't say there are any positives at this point. Who knows down the line when I've processed it a bit more. But it was difficult being away from the family. The funeral was just immediate family only. Organising a funeral. And actually, I think for a lot of people who had to have funerals during that time, they were robbed of a lot of the rituals and rites they would have normally have done as well. We were very lucky. Our undertaker was fantastic, but a lot of the chaplaincy services, didn't happen.
Like we said, everyone deals with grief in different ways. Some people, they'll process it and, like you did, carry on and just try to be the best that they can. Others will fall apart, maybe turn to substances, for example. How would you approach that person and say, maybe you're turning to, I don't know, alcohol, drugs, or something like that because you're grieving?
Yeah. So interesting the way that you asked that question is that some people will fall apart. Okay. And this is part of the problem. Okay.
Right? That's
interesting. Yeah, you're right. It's wording. Yeah.
Problem,
yeah.
Right. You're not falling apart. You're not broken. You're grieving.
And
why would you not turn to something that gives you momentarily relief? Why would you not? There should be no shame. There should be no judgment in that. There should be a gentle understanding and a coaxing of that person to say, it's safe to open your heart. Like, I understand. Why wouldn't you turn to this substance? Why wouldn't you turn to cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, pornography, sex, whatever it may be, workaholism, because it hurts so much. Anyone who has experienced grief can understand that it rips your whole world apart. So why would you not? So the first thing is that we need to drop the shame and judgment of, you're not being strong, you're not dealing with it well. We should come from a place of, why would you not? Yeah. Why would you not?
You're right.
But you know what? We've covered a number of subjects, and we've come across this before. And again, Taj asked a question. I didn't think of anything of it until you that's where the issue is, and it's like light bulb moment.
It just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Because that's what you're used to hearing. Oh, you're falling apart. And you're right. It's the education. We need to learn how to
not say that. And
not say that.
Yeah.
There are so many things that we can change in our common language, in our phraseology, if that's a word, that will actually be supportive of people in grief. So for example, and people are well-meaning, okay, but people get uncomfortable around grief. And so, if you say to someone, if you dare to open up and say, well, this is how I'm feeling at the moment, well-meaning people will immediately jump in and say, oh, no, I know, but you should count yourself lucky because so-and-so down the road, their dog ran away with next door's cat, but at least you've got this, yes. you should be grateful. Or if we're absolutely breaking our heart over someone who's died, who's been ill for a prolonged period of time, something you hear all the time is, no, stop, don't cry, you mustn't cry. You should be thankful they're at peace now. They're not in pain anymore. And you know what? Factually speaking, that's true. They're not in pain anymore. But that doesn't mean that your heart's not breaking, that you don't get to see them every day. You can't pick up the phone to them. And what that does is it invokes shame in the griever. So not only is their pain invalidated, they've been given a big dollop of shame and guilt on top of that as well. So, no, I'm so selfish, I'm just thinking about myself. Why would you not think about the feelings that you're experiencing? And so, just learning the beautiful art of holding a safe space for people and saying, you can tell me and I will not judge you and I will not interrupt you and I will not tell you how you should be feeling. I will just honor you in this space. Is something that if we all learned, I think the world would be a more deeply compassionate place as well.
In that case, where someone is letting, and this might sound like a really silly question, but where someone is very open in their emotions and does cry during that period or for a prolonged period, do you think that is then healthier than perhaps what we've been through when we're going through the grieving process of not crying and saying, actually, I need help and I am really upset about this?
Everyone's grieving process is very unique and individual. Okay. Constitutionally, we're all very different depending on our position in the family. Are we the eldest child, the youngest child, our past traumatic experiences, our losses, the kind of personality that we have. Me, for example, I'm very uncomfortable crying in public. I am a grief coach and I'm happy to kind of say that. But with my safe people, I will cry, and it's this perception that grieving should look like this, right? Grief looks like it looks like, and it's different in every individual. And we need to become more sensitive and attuned to that and ask the right questions, and make it okay to say to people, how are you doing? I really want to know. Tell me how you're feeling about this right now. Like, I'm here to listen to you. Not like, oh, it's so good to see you. It's really sad. Oh, what can you do? Anyway, on a lighter note, and people do this, right? And we don't give grievers space. And when you've experienced and you're in that process of grieving and someone does that, it's like a knife in your heart. You're like, you've just invalidated everything about me. I shouldn't be here. I'm bringing everyone down. I'm not capable of being in company and talking about light things. I'm going to talk about what's happened to me, you see. And that's where people then isolate. They isolate themselves. And you see a lot of isolation in grievers because they feel so misunderstood and they feel shame for what actually is a very normal and natural process.
When you went through that light bulb moment of going to a counsellor and someone saying you're grieving and you just haven't dealt with it, would you say, as part of your role, that there does tend to be a sort of time frame and stages that you go through before you get to the end and say, actually, I understand it is an emotional thing. Again, this is going to be the language now thinking about it, but I need to move on. If that's there we are. You're
Sorry.
wrong. No, that's fair enough. Again, it's the language again.
I love your honesty, and I love what's coming up right now, because so number one, everyone talks about the stages of grief, which is an absolute
you can swear on this podcast as well.
You don't want to tell me that. It's an absolute misrepresentation of what the stages of grief are. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did, she constructed the 5 stages there of grief, but they were the grief. The study was done on people who are dying. Okay. So, and that it was their grief. It was actually the 5 stages of dying. People have turned it into the 5 stages of grieving. And it was very convenient, right? Because grief is so overwhelming and messy and scary. Why would we not want a framework for it? I know. Let's borrow that framework. Let's put it here and let's turn it into the 5 stages of grief. Anger, denial, bargaining, and all the rest of it. It doesn't work. Anyone who has grieved will know that their grief has not gone along a certain framework. You will grieve forever. However, the intensity of your grief, the eyes through which you see your grief, the conditioning through which you experience your grief will change. If you do the inner work, you can heal. Your grief doesn't get smaller. You grow bigger around your grief. You are able to hold it. You are able to know that it's resurfacing. I need to give myself the self-care that I need right now. Because how will you ever forget about what happened? How can you ever push down what happened? How can you ever not think about what happened? That was a big part of your life, whether it's divorce, whether it's a death of a parent, a child. You speak to a bereaved parent and suggest to them that they should move on. See the response that you get. right?
Mm.
You can't forget. Moving on is ridiculous. Moving through the pain is what we do. We can't go over it. We can't go under it like the bear hunt, but we can move through our emotions as they rise, and we carry our grief forever, but we can carry it in a healthier way.
Do you think that we don't then, as a family, especially because we've got kids, talk about death enough with our kids then?
I'm so passionate about this, right? So, number one, children grieve and see death very differently to adults, right? And we don't talk about death enough, right? Because it's almost, especially in the South Asian community, it's almost as if you talk about death, you're inviting death, right? And actually, death is the most certain thing we can all promise ourselves, right? It's going to happen. It's going to come. We're all going to die. So let's invite conversations about death. And especially when there's been grief in the family, what we do is people are well-meaning. They try and shield the children. They're too young. They don't need to know about this. Oh, no. And the big thing that happens is the one phrase that people use often is if the child wants to know what happened. Oh, no, they just fell asleep, right? Our language, again, is so important because you tell a child that someone fell asleep and you're never going to see them again, they're going to have night terrors. They're not going to want to go to sleep, right?
Very good point. Yeah.
We have to think about the language, and we must make it's okay. Like, it's okay to talk about death. Like, what happens? I don't know what happens. This is what people say. There are so many fantastic books out there as well. And actually, my sister and I, my other sister, we've got Gems, our sister, as well. And we found a lot of solace in children's books after Dad died, because it really connected you to that. When you find yourself effectively orphaned, you've got both of your parents not here, and that sense of being an orphan still exists even though you're an adult, which really shocked me. You have to nurture the child within you, and there's so many different ways to do that. And with children, we can do that through books, through answering their questions. And when a child is grieving, when there's a grief that's happened, a loss that's happened, we mustn't tell them everything in the way that all the things that we think they should know. We sit them down and we say, ask me whatever you want to know. Ask, only answer the questions that they come up with, and leave it open. So you come back to me if you think of another question, and I'll answer it, and answer it in a way that's not frightening for them and that's really practical for them as well. And children go in and out of grief. They grieve very differently to adults as well. So leaving the door open, answering their questions in a very factual way. Let's not use too many metaphors, because that will confuse the heck out of them. And we should 100% talk more about death with them. Yeah, we should.
See, another thing, talking about the child side of things, one thing that we've been through as well is you have a battle in your head. Should you take the child to the funeral? Shouldn't you take the child to the funeral? And I don't think there's ever going to be a right answer. But what do you think? Do you think it helps in the grieving process, or do you think it's too early to take, I don't know, for example, a 10-year-old to...
10 is not too young. And I think that if the child is old enough, we need to give them a choice. We need to give them a choice. I did that with my kids when they were younger, when we lost my in-laws and things. We give them a choice. My elder son was like, yeah, I want to be there. He was there by my side through all the rituals, everything. My younger one was like, nope, don't want any part of it. And I was like, that's fine. I respect that. We need to give them a choice, because so often I end up working with clients as 40, 50, 60-year-olds, and they were like, I couldn't say my last goodbye. I wasn't given the choice. The choice was made for me as a child, and it's not fair to do that. If the child is old enough to understand, and yeah, it's going to be upsetting. Yeah, it's going to be distressing, but it's life. It's a real sacred part of our journey on this earth.
I think as parents, you always think you do whatever you can to protect your child, and
We
you
don't
feel
want to
like
see them in pain.
that's it, and you make that decision for them. But what you've pointed out is you're taking away that point that they can say bye to the person.
Yeah.
So yeah, no. So
And it's a
important.
sense of, on a very extreme level, it's us exerting control. And I'm a firm believer that our children are not ours. We're just caretakers, right? They come through us, but they're not ours. And they have their own experiences they need to have on this earth as well. And we need to, when they are, old enough, to give them those choices as well, and be guided by them, because that's how we encourage them to be they're individuals that they actually are. They're not extensions of us. They are an entity in their own right, and we are placed in a big position of responsibility, and a big part of our responsibility in executing that responsibility is giving them the choice if they're old enough, and saying, how old would they be is for you to gauge. Every child is different, but we must allow them that choice.
I wanted to discuss the book that you wrote. Can you tell us first of all what it's called?
Yeah, sure. So I wrote a journal, and the journal is called Grief, Heartbreak and Hope. So let me tell you how the book came into existence. So I remember sitting there about 4 weeks after Dad died, and I had a lot of time on my hands because we were isolated at home. And I just remember thinking, I never knew grief could feel like this, because I'd felt pain after Mum died, and this was completely different because my relationship with my dad was completely different. And I was like, I honestly felt like ringing up every single person I'd ever worked with and just say, I'm so sorry, I thought I realised what you were going through. But, the realisation that everyone will experience it differently, and the thought of anyone sitting there alone, and so many people hide their grief, and not having an outlet for it just broke my heart. I was like, if there's even one other person sitting out there feeling like this, it breaks my heart. So I said, I've got to do something, because this is my mode of operation. This is what I do when I go through some kind of adversity. I'm like, oh my goodness, if I'm feeling like this, I need to help other people that are feeling like this. So I remember just getting out my pad and pen, and I was like, I'm going to create a journal. So there's a really safe space, because we lack safe spaces in society generally, to just try and process some of what they're experiencing. And so I wrote this book, but the one sensation that I felt, this one thing that kept coming from my heart, was there was so much more to say. And I spoke to my dad endlessly for hours and hours and hours. It was my favorite thing in the world to do, to sit and speak with him. And even though we had so many hours and years together, I still felt there was so much more to say. And so the journal's called Grief, Heartbreak and Hope. There was so much more to say. And the journal has lots of beautiful prompts. It teaches you self-care, has affirmations to give you hope, and the permission to grieve as well. And it just helps you because grief is a big ball. It's a big tight ball, and it's like, I don't know what to do with it. So it helps you to untangle and unfurl that ball gently, and just reconnect with your loved one, and just say all the things that you wish you could have said, or you want to tell them again. So, yeah.
Do you think writing your book then helped you process?
Yeah, I'm a doer.
Yeah, you totally come across as that, so I'm not shocked that you said that.
Yeah, I think the way that I process emotion is in the doing, and I think that any way that we can move helps us to process emotion anyway. So it definitely helped me, because my dad was somebody who did so much for everyone in the community. And it doesn't matter what he went through, he always found the strength to help somebody else. And that was a tribute to him. It was like, the best way that I can honour you is to continue your legacy and help as many people as I can, because I knew that who knows the pain that he went through. My mum was 34 years old. My dad wasn't even 50 yet when he lost mum, and he never remarried. And who knows the pain that he must have gone through every day. But he did incredible things with his life, and that was my legacy. That's the legacy that he leaves behind. And all three of us, my whole family, we want to just continue that.
How would you encourage someone who you think being close to them needs help processing the whole thing, and saying, actually, I'm grieving, just like you said earlier in the podcast, but they refuse to do it?
Okay.
Because they're keeping themselves busy. I suppose exactly the same as what you were saying earlier about yourself.
Yeah.
How do you stop them and say, listen to me, I think it's this?
We can't ever make anyone do anything. And I think it's really important that people get there themselves. But there's things that we can do. I think the point that family and friends reach is, this is getting ridiculous now, you need to do something about this. Okay, clearly there's something going on. Oh my God, that's going to make you so defensive, right? So I think it's just coming at it from a really loving, compassionate way and say, look, I know you, and I know the way that you are being right now, or you're reacting is not who you really are. I want you to know that I see that you're struggling, and if you ever want to talk about this, perhaps look at getting help, I just want you to know I'm here to have that conversation. That's it. And you leave it with them.
And then as we come towards the end of this podcast, what advice would you give to someone who does know that they are going through the grieving process? What advice would you give them?
First of all, the advice is there's nothing wrong with you. You are going through the most normal and natural process, but also that you don't have to do it alone. If you find yourself feeling stuck, and how do you know if you're stuck? If you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling depressed, if you're procrastinating, you feel a sense of hopelessness, you can't find joy in anything, and you've been there for a while, right? Then it's okay to seek help. And when you seek help, if the first person doesn't work for you, that's okay. Like, keep trying. And also my journal will help with any bereavement as well. But, and also, like, we go through many, many tragic, horrific things in life, but we must hold on to hope that, we can move through this, we can grow bigger around our grief, we can heal from our trauma, and life can once again be beautiful again.
Thank you so much, Dipti, for your time today. And I always find subjects like this so eye-opening. So I really appreciate you coming on.
No, I appreciate both of you. I loved the questions.
Oh, good.
Thank you so much. And if anyone wants to find me, they can find me on my website, diptisolanki.com. And and if you're struggling out there, please just know that you're not alone, and you will come through this, and it's safe to reach out to somebody.
Perfect. Thanks so much. That's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, changing_suits, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.